Welcome to the Modern Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Pardee. This podcast, along with my private practice in LA and my newsletter, all are aimed to providing you evidence-based information around preventative medicine, longevity, and health in general. Join me in dispelling health myths as well as cutting through the noise that is social media. I hope that whether you want to optimize your performance or just in general get healthier, the Modern Wellness Podcast will help you do that. Today I'm joined by Frank Hawley, the founder and owner of Vero, a premium fitness center in Venice, California. He has worked as a research assistant, has over a decade of experience in the fitness industry, and is a champion powerlifter and strength and conditioning coach. Frank blends evidence-based strategies with practical experience to help clients achieve their fitness goals. Frank is also my personal trainer, and I'm so excited to chat with him today. All right, welcome.
It's good to be here.
Thanks for coming.
I'm excited.
We chat very casually through sets. So it's usually I'm sweating out of breath, you're talking about science, and I'm trying to get distracted from the amount of pain that you've put me through.
Right. I feel like the tables are a little turned right now where you're kind of in the driver's seat.
I'm in the power seat.
Yeah.
I like it. We need that once in a while.
Yeah, I think so.
So we're going to talk about muscle growth. We're going to talk about strength, and all from a lens of preventative medicine and longevity. And the reason I wanted to do this is because, first of all, you really know your stuff, so I appreciate that. And it's so common that I'm talking to people about their exercise routines, and I can tell that they're really trying to hit a goal and they're not getting there, and they just don't understand some of the basics behind it. And so I'm excited for this to be a resource for people to go to help them on that journey.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of stuff in the fitness space is very complex and convoluted, but resistance training can be as simple or as easy as you make it, or as simple as hard as you should make it, I should say. And a lot of social media stuff rewards complexity because there is this idea that the more complicated something is, the more expertise you're showing. When in my experience, the more simple you can make something, the more of an expert you become, and then only introducing complexity when you need to.
And that's my general philosophy about most things in health in general, not just the fitness space. And we have a mutual, I think, love-hate with social media, where there's a lot of good that comes out of it, and there's a lot of, you want to pull your hair out with some of the stuff that you see there.
Yeah, totally agree, especially now.
Yeah, especially now. Okay, so just starting off, why did you get into the fitness industry?
Yeah, this is a question I get very frequently, especially as someone who owns a fitness center now and is a personal trainer. Originally, that was not my goal. I was an economics and philosophy major at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I thought my life was going to go a very different direction. I think intentionally steered away from sciences, despite the fact that a lot of my family are scientists and have studied science, and I kind of wanted to zig where they zagged. But as I moved throughout college, I was thinking about what am I going to do with my life. I realized that whether I was going to be a lawyer or a writer, this, that, and the other, I wanted to have a fit body because no matter what you're doing, your body's going to come with you. So whatever the idealized version of myself was going to be big, strong, fit, whatever, because that is just a good place to start as I'm building my life. So I started really just getting into the fitness side of things. I stopped drinking to excess, which a lot of college kids do. And
did you do that when you were in college? You stopped, or post?
It was about my senior year of college is when I started to realize I feel like this train is starting to come to an end, and I need to get my life together. So I started getting real nerdy about it. So just learning everything I could. When I talk about overcomplicating things earlier, that was for sure me, just thinking that more complicated was more better, and not getting really the results that I wanted, and then starting to tweak, how can I get the things that I want to get out of training. So then when I graduated, I got a job at a food science lab at Tufts University, where I started to learn more about the research side of things, and then I started personal training as honestly just a way to kill time before I figured out what I was going to do when I grew up. But then, I was pretty good at it. It kept learning, kept being interesting to me. But then I moved from Wisconsin to Los Angeles because, listen, I love Wisconsin. Wisconsin's great. They have amazing cheese curds, but they don't have as much an emphasis on health and wellness as we did out here. So if I wanted to succeed in the fitness world, I felt like this is the place I had to do it. So I moved out here, got a job at Gold's Gym Venice, where I started networking, building up a clientele, then ended up launching my own thing, and now I have a studio on Lincoln where I can really just control the environment and making sure that when people come in, they're getting the best returns on their investment for whenever they work out.
Yeah, and I should probably go back to where we started, where I said you made me in pain. Frank is my personal trainer.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that could be maybe taken out of context.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And the Vera Gym is great. I love it. It's beautiful. You have an obsessive mind just like myself, and I say that with a lot of love because you really put care into like everything that you purchase for that gym.
Yeah, I think if I could go back a second to my time at Wisconsin. So I played sports in high school, but was never serious enough or good enough to play, especially at the D1 level where I wanted to go, which was Wisconsin. And it was always really annoying to me because I knew athletes and they would train in like the athlete gym, which had all of the nice stuff and it was very organized. And I had to go train at like the rec center, which had like 2 squat racks and like it was messy and like it's just a free for all. And listen, I wasn't a professional athlete, but that doesn't mean that I didn't want to train like a professional athlete or I wasn't taking it as seriously as a professional athlete. So I think that's when the idea for Vero started to marinate, was that I wanted to create a space such that it's modeled after a professional strength and conditioning facility, but is accessible to, the common person.
I love that. Yeah. I like nice things.
Me too.
Yeah. Especially things that are like data driven and help you get to where you want to go, which you have a lot of those things in your gym, but also just like pretty things too.
Yeah. Sometimes I joke that the only reason I started a gym was to buy the stuff that I wanted to buy.
I love it. Okay. So why do we care about building muscle in general?
Well, I think there's a lot of good reasons, which I'll get to in a second. But if I'm being honest, when I was in college getting really into this stuff, I just wanted to look good naked. So, which is important when you're in college and trying to attract the attention of the opposite sex.
But that was your first that was it. It was aesthetics to begin with, which I think most of us can relate with.
Like, absolutely. Especially, at that age, you're trying to differentiate. You're trying to, get the attention of someone who you want the attention of. And that is just a very easy way to do it. Especially, I think people who know me now might not realize, but there's a bit of social awkwardness when you're younger. And it was always kind of tough for me to talk to, strangers or people I wanted to talk to. So I felt like aesthetics and just the way I appeared was a good foot in the door for whatever it is. So if I'm looking slovenly, I just feel like it's an uphill battle, versus if I look a bit better, it's easier to get the things that you want in life.
Yeah.
Okay. But beyond that, there's a myriad of reasons why you kind of want a bit of muscle strength. So there is this very strong correlation between not only muscle size, but strength and longevity. So how well you age, not just how long you live, but how well you're living. Beyond that, I've struggled with a bit of depression and anxiety, and getting good at something, especially when it's something that other people value, brings a certain degree of self-confidence, which was important for my mental health. Keeps me on some sort of schedule. I have goals. I'm goal-orientated, where, I'm setting out a task, I'm accomplishing it, which I can then apply to other aspects of my life, which I greatly appreciate. You're healthier, you live longer, you are able to move through space easier. So you're not in pain, you don't get sick as much. And I look at other people my age now and they stop moving. When you're young, you play a lot, and then, just life happens and they're suffering from a series of chronic issues of low back pain, shoulder pain, they're overweight, this, that, and the other. And they keep telling me, oh, when you get a bit older, you're going to feel, you're not going to be able to do the stuff that you do, but I keep doing it and I keep getting better at it. And, they don't. I think that's all part of it.
Yeah, for sure. And in my practice, we talk a ton about metabolic health and how important just movement in general is. And you and I are on the same page with this. Just like any movement is good movement. We're going to get into the weeds a little bit today. But like that being the overall theme of like move your body is better than not moving your body. And then there's good research that exercise, getting stronger, being more metabolically healthy reduces your risk for most chronic diseases, including cancers, as well as diabetes, but even dementia, cognitive disorders. And so I've talked about that pretty in depth on some other podcasts. And so today we're just going to stay in the realm of like, how do you do this versus, a ton of the why behind it. But that being kind of the foundation as to why this is so important for us to discuss. What do you think the biggest mistakes you see people make when they're on the journey of becoming stronger or adding more muscle to their body?
Yeah. I alluded to it earlier, but believing that more complicated means more better. So I'm going to do this variation. I'm going to do 50 sets of bicep curls. I'm going to do this, that, and the other. I'm going to train 6-7 days a week for 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever that is. So that is a big problem when instead you kind of want to make sure that you're simplifying things, that you're able to identify patterns as they emerge, that you're able to separate signal from noise. They program hop too much, so they might do one thing for a while, and then they're like, get bored of that, so they try something else, and then they jump to something else. So when you do that, it makes it harder to progressively overload, which is another mistake people make, is that they'll just go into the gym, throw some weights around, do what feels good for that day. They're not tracking progress. They don't know how much they did before, which makes it harder to make sure that you're doing more now. So the truth of the matter is that your body really does not want to get better. Your body wants to turn into a lumpy pile of fat and disintegrate. The only reason that it doesn't is that you're proving to it that it's more worthwhile to get fit than not. And so the way I look at it is that exercise and proper training is just a dialogue, and it's communication between you and what you value and your body. So whenever you train, what you're telling your body is like, here are the things that I value. I value getting stronger. I value getting more muscle. I value increasing power. The exercises and the variations that you do will make that communication more clear. And then your body's going to communicate back at you as to whether or not it likes it or not. So it communicates back through adaptation, through being able to do stuff it wasn't able to do before. And you need to be in tune with what it's telling you. It needs to be able to be in tune with what you're telling it. And that's where I feel like people get a bit lost in the weeds. Either they're too complicated or they don't have some sort of structured training program.
Yeah, and the second one is what I see the most, where people come in. I'll just give like a general archetype of somebody that I see, but like let's say her name is Julie. She comes in, she's completely normal BMI. We run a DEXA, maybe her muscle mass is a little on the lower side compared to where we want to see it, but I ask her, what are you doing for exercise? And this is so common. And remember, any movement is better than no movement.
Agreed. I'm like, so like I might trash on some other forms of exercise throughout the hour, but I am in favor of people working out, whatever it is. They don't have to be on a Frank Hawley training program in order to make progress. I think that would be ridiculous to say.
Yeah.
I just have found a certain way that I like to organize training that sees results, but I'm in favor of however you want to train and work out.
Agreed. Yeah. So I forgot if I named her Julie or Julia.
I think it was Julie.
Yeah. Julie's better. Okay. Sorry, Julia's. So Julie comes in and she says, well, on Mondays I go to this HIIT program. I'm going to not use names of places, but I go to this HIIT program. I do this high intensity thing on the treadmill plus some free weights. And then on Tuesdays I walk with a friend. And then on Wednesdays I go do this booty boot camp. And then on Thursdays, sometimes I'll do Pilates, and then I go for a run or something like that. And, that's phenomenal, right? She's getting so much movement in throughout the week. But when you hear something like that, where could if her goal is to put on 5 pounds of muscle in the next, year and a half or so?
So, yeah, a lot of people train for all sorts of reasons. And some of it is just that they know that they should be training because that's what you're supposed to be doing. So but they hate training. So they just need to find a way to entertain themselves as they work out. So you might do a class or in order to do that, and you're just trying to tick those boxes. Where I try to differentiate and separate myself is if your goal is building strength, building muscle, that is really your priority, and you're not trying to do the other stuff. I'm not trying to entertain you. Like, we have fun when we train, but like, I'm not really trying to make you have a good time. I'm trying to get you stronger, build a bit of muscle. So for that, it goes back to what I was saying before, where you're trying to separate signal from noise and progressively overload. So if you are doing a class and you're doing kettlebell swings one time, and then you're doing deadlifts another time, then you're doing box jumps another time, and then you're doing step ups the time after that. Are you getting better? Are you progressing? Or are you just kind of spinning your wheels? Like, it's really impossible to tell because there's no A to B comparison that you're doing. Beyond that, so like the communication that I was talking about before between you and your body, you're not speaking to your body articulately. You're saying, here is just a bunch of stuff. I'm going to throw it at the wall. You figure it out. Versus if you have just a very simplistic training program where you are doing 1 more rep, 5 more pounds, what you're communicating to your body is that the environment that you are in is getting harder. You need to get harder in order to keep up with that. So you want to keep progress going up and to the right. But if you are confusing your body with the same workout class and you're not progressively overloading, you are going to get better at first when you first start doing it because you're going from nothing to something. That is progressive overload. So you will start making some progress. But then if you never challenge yourself beyond that, if you're just doing the same thing over and over again, never grabbing a heavier kettlebell or whatever, your body's like, oh, the environment that I am in is staying static. I too am going to stay static. And then eventually you would age out of that or maybe get hurt and then you regress. Versus, communicating to your body that every week when I squat, the bar is going up 5 pounds. So next week I need to be 5 pounds stronger in order to complete this task because the world is getting harder.
Yeah. And as people are listening to this, I think it can be easy to say, well, this sounds really complicated. This is actually the more simple way to do things in my mind. Like, it makes things like much more digestible and almost overly simplified, but it can be that easy.
Yeah. I think strength training, resistance training is as simple or as complicated as you make it. Mm-hmm. But I agree with you. I think that I almost name dropped a hit class studio. We won't trash them though. If you're doing just a different class every week, it's noisy. And I don't really like noise. I like very objective measurements to see whether or not you're getting better or worse. So one of the smartest things I ever did as a trainer was just be objectively transparent with my clients. So writing down all the programs, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's what you did last week, here's what you did a month ago, and then very clearly communicating which stuff is working well, but also as importantly is what's not working as well as I would want. So on a training program, you might do, let's just say 10 different exercises, and your deadlift might have gone up 30 pounds over 6 weeks. Really good. Your lat pull down might have gone up 5, 10 pounds. Not as good. So
the number of times I've heard you say not as good when I'm working out is slightly, but it's good. It's good. It makes me
right.
motivated.
So everyone's so obsessed with like short-term thinking of what am I doing in this workout? Mm-hmm. And the way that I look, whenever I approach a workout, I really have 2 objectives. The first one is to drive the adaptation that I'm trying to drive, getting stronger, getting bigger, whatever it is. But the second, which I feel like a lot of people don't do, is to figure out what's happened since last time you worked out or last time you did this workout. So are you getting better? Are you getting worse? Are you staying stagnant? So we all want to get better, but it's unrealistic to assume that it's going to happen indefinitely forever and ever. So if I'm starting to plateau or if I'm regressing, that's important information for me to know because it will inform what future training looks like. So how do I navigate this space such that I am continually making progress for as long as possible versus spinning your wheels, noisy, maybe, I don't want to say lying to yourself, but I feel like if you are doing these classes or you're just going to the gym and doing whatever workout, you can say like, yeah, I feel like I'm getting better. Like I just like feel so, but everybody's focused on these feelings. Like, it's just like, I feel like I feel, but like, I don't care about feelings. Like, I want data to tell me that this is worth my time.
For the record, that is Frank's comment, not my own, but I totally get what you mean though too, is that you want to be much more objective versus these subjective measures of, I feel like things are going in the right direction.
Right. I don't know what to do with feelings. Everyone has feelings. Minreet might have something to say about that
later.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't control how you feel. I can just, try to make you squat more.
Yeah.
That's what I can control. I can control this environment. Maybe it goes back to how I designed Vero, where I just wanted everything where I wanted it to be. So I just want to make sure that, if you're coming in, like, I'm getting the stuff that I want. Like, I can't make you necessarily enjoy the workout, but I can make sure that you're getting better in these spaces.
Yeah, and if you're new to working out in general and the classes seem like accessible and, just easy for you, most people will get results if they go from being sedentary to doing anything, right?
Agreed.
And so I think what you're talking about is once somebody hits that plateau of, maybe they're now experiencing only subjective measures of improvement, and probably metabolic changes, right? Where it was much easier for them to complete the workouts because their cardiovascular fitness level has just improved. But like, if you're really looking to do something specific, get stronger, put on X amount of muscle, then having a more direct, objective, simple routine may be the better option.
Yeah, I agree. At least that's the way I look at it. I know that a lot of people have different thoughts and opinions on training, but that's what I think.
Yeah. Okay, so we developed a strength and mobility assessment together where we put our preventative medicine longevity patients from Modern Med, we send them over to you guys, and you do a full mobility strength assessment. The reason why I wanted to do this from our end is that there's a good amount of research that shows that, yes, having muscle on your body is really important. It reduces the risk for most chronic diseases, osteoporosis especially, metabolic diseases, even cancer. But when we look at muscle mass versus strength, it seems that strength ends up winning out in terms of being more beneficial from a longevity standpoint. So the actual function of the muscle versus just having the muscle there in general. And so we do DEXA scans on most of our patients, and that gives us how much muscle somebody has, which is, again, really valuable measurement. But we also wanted to assess the function of that muscle in terms of strength. So we do grip strength measuring on people in the office, and then we send them to you guys to do mobility and strength assessments. So I want to kind of talk about how you decided which exercises go in there and what it looks like.
Yeah. Totally agree with you. Yeah, strength is going to be more important for longevity than muscle mass, probably for a few reasons. I think it might be good to differentiate a bit because what is muscle versus strength? So when you talk about hypertrophy, which is just a fancy word for muscle growth, it's physiologically just like getting the muscle bigger versus strength, which is the ability of that muscle to produce force against a static object, right? So different, like similar but different. And what we know is that a bigger muscle has a higher potential to be stronger, but that's not necessarily the case. So a lot of my training is more powerlifting focused, which is being able to do a squat, bench, deadlift for 1 rep as much as you can. And because of that, I am able to lift more than some of these big bodybuilders that you see who might have 50 more pounds of muscle on them, but they don't train in those strength spaces as much. So they're not, they're bigger muscles. I don't want to call them dumber muscles, but they can't as efficiently produce force against static objects as strength. So there are these different adaptations that you can elicit from your body, strength being one of them. So as you age, more muscle isn't necessarily as important as strength because you need to be able to navigate the demands of daily life. You need to be able to squat, pick things up, move a couch, carry your groceries, this, that, and the other. And mobility ties in with that too. So a little bit of a tangent, but I think we'll be okay.
That's important.
We'll be okay. No, I mean where I'm going next. So
we're still going.
We're still going. So a lot of people use flexibility and mobility interchangeably. but they are different things. So flexibility is just the joint's ability to move through a passive range of motion. So if you were to be like knocked out and someone's ability to just move your joint through free space with no resistance, or if you were in the vacuum of space, how would your body be able to move? And that's different than mobility, which is active range of motion. So when there's some sort of resistance acting on it. So if you can do a full depth bodyweight squat, but whenever you throw a barbell on your back, you stop halfway down because there's some sort of impingement, or like that's a mobility issue. So with the assessment that we came up with, it was important that the joint was able to move through the range of motion that we deem as like important. So like we wouldn't have to do any corrective work there. And then beyond that, testing just all the muscles of the body and how strong they are. So grip strength is usually the default way to assess strength for large populations. You just have this little machine, you squeeze it, and it tells you how heavy how good your grip is. And if you just need like a 5-second way to assess strength, it's pretty good. But it doesn't paint a very accurate picture of how strong your whole body is, right? So it might be that you just have really strong grip because of whatever
Your
reason,
job.
right? But
Yeah.
how, because I have strong grip strength, how much of a correlation is that between, your leg strength, which is leg strength is going to be, I would argue, based on vibes, more important than upper body strength as you age.
Well, I actually just read a research article that supported that claim. I think they talked about the quadricep muscle specifically.
Good.
So I don't think it's just vibes,
Well,
but vibes are
It's good to know my
obviously
vibes are like
important.
in line with
Yeah.
where the research is. So I wanted to figure out a way where I could, along with you, figure out a way where we could more accurately say this person here is your strength levels, not only in aggregate, but within 6 of the fundamental movement patterns, which I'll talk about right now. So basically, every exercise that you do is just a derivative of one of 6 patterns of the body. So they are horizontal, vertical, pushing and pulling, followed by some sort of squat, some sort of hip hinge. And if we could get readings on those 6, it's going to pretty accurately measure your strength for the body as a whole. And then the issue with that is so we needed some sort of way to measure strength for these 6 patterns. And I thought a good way, because there's no data on this stuff right now, but there is some information on estimated 1 rep max for these lifts in certain populations. But the issue is that if people are coming in to do a strength assessment with me, I'm not going to do a 1 rep max test on 6 fundamental movement patterns because I would never see them again.
And some of these people haven't really lifted much.
Correct.
So there's also a safety component there too.
1000% agree. So how can I get this estimation on what their 1 rep max would be? 1 rep max just meaning as much weight as you can lift one time on something. So using some information that I found on velocity loss during a set, you can calculate based on the speed of the fastest rep and the slowest rep, what percentage of a 1 RM they are doing right now. And then you would just be able to tie it to some established normative data on 1 rep max training for certain populations. So picking some sort of variation in start with a horizontal push, which would be like a bench press, push up, dumbbell press, something like that. Doing a set of 8 reasonably heavy enough where velocity drop off would start becoming a thing. So it's above a warm up weight, but
I'm
not.
going to pause you. Velocity drop off. Just
Right.
quick overview of what the heck you mean by that.
can't believe
It
you're-
really sounds cool though.
Yeah, I can't believe your listeners don't know what velocity drop off is. So velocity drop off just means that, let's just say that you're doing a set of 8 and the fastest rep that you did was 0.2 meters per second. And then your slowest rep was 0.1 meter per second. You had a 50% velocity drop off there.
Yeah. And you have a machine that does this to
yeah.
clarify.
It's a little computer attached to a string
Yeah.
that goes on either a barbell or a dumbbell. I was using it today. It's the nerdiest piece of fitness tech that I have in that gym, but I love it. It also measures range of motion, which is good for like squatting, where the range of motion isn't standardized.
I forget to, oh boy, tangent, but
Let's go.
can you set that device so that it beeps at the desired depth?
Yeah, you can. You need to tie it to a phone or an iPad. It would be within the app. I think we played around with that for once.
Yeah, because I really
program.
like that idea of just being like, beep, you hit where we want you to on your squat, you can go up now.
Right. And then there's some other really good information on like submaximal training. So like if you were training like 3 sets of 8 at like a 75% 1RM with leaving like 2 reps in reserve, as soon as you hit a certain velocity drop off, it would beep and tell you like you're at 2 reps in reserve now. Terminate early.
Yeah. Interesting. That's cool.
It is cool. Sometimes this is my issue that I run into all the time is how much is data useful and how much of it is just noisy?
Well, I was going to say, we started the podcast by saying complexity can be the killer to progress.
Right. So my strategy for the most part is keep things as simple as you can and only introduce complexity when necessary. So when people are starting a new program, I really try to keep the exercises as simple as possible. And as weak points or new goals emerge, then introducing complexity on what has already been established. So I would never like start someone off on pin squats, for example. So pin squats being just a normal barbell squat where you have the safety arms and then you put it to a fixed height and then rest it on it and then come up, unless they showed a need that is the variation that we should be doing.
Which we did that.
We did do that because you were starting to cut your squats a little high.
Yeah.
So I needed to standardize range of motion on that.
Yes. Frank was disappointed.
I wouldn't say disappointed. I just really want you to maximize your time at Vero.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Okay, we went off-roading. Coming back to strength assessment, you're using the velocity tracking to be able to estimate a 1 rep max is the main point.
That's it in a nutshell, right? Yeah. For the 6 patterns. So doing like a dumbbell overhead press, barbell bench press, squat, some sort of, usually trap bar deadlift because people are more comfortable with that, and assisted pull-up or lat pull-down, or like a single arm dumbbell row. So that's your 6 fundamental patterns ticked. And to mitigate what's called the interference effect. Interference effect is just if you do something, it's going to negatively affect the thing that comes after. So a simple way to imagine that you just ran a 5K and then I told you to squat next. Your squats are going to suffer. So with the strength assessment, we thought it would be best to have it over the course of 2 days. So that way you're doing one of your 2 leg movements, some push, some pull. There is going to be very little to any interference effect there. Versus if you did all 6 in the same day, we probably wouldn't get as accurate measurements. The exercises that came on the latter half would most likely suffer. Yeah.
And so I have an example of what this kind of looks like when somebody is done with it. So mobility is pretty straightforward. You're looking at the main joints and the movement of those joints. And then in terms of the actual lifts, you have those 6 lifts out, and the readings that we're looking at are the estimated 1 rep max. And then you go one step further and we divide it out into your percentage, your percentile.
Right.
Right? Can you talk a little bit about what the percentiles actually mean?
Sure. I feel like everybody at some point in their life has dealt with like percentiles or sort of like, SATs, or like anybody with a baby knows that like their baby.
That's a good one.
Side tangent. I feel like every baby that I meet, their parents brag about that they're in the 90th percentile for weight. And I'm like, this can't be true because like they're all in like the 98th percentile for this.
Where are those 70ers?
Statistically, this is wrong. Like, anyways, so percentile just means like out of 100 random people, how likely you would be to like, where would you stack up, right? So if you are in like the 98th percentile, you are stronger than 98% of people for this lift, at least within your age and sex. So if you are in the 10th percentile on something, we got some work to do because 90% of people are stronger than you in this. So based on the readings that we can come out with there, we can figure out where an individual is relatively strong, relatively weak. So you might be strong everywhere. So let's just say that you're above, 60 percentile and everything. But your squat, you're in like the 90th percentile, and your deadlift, you're in like the 65th. There's a bit of a gap there. So there's probably some gains to be had by prioritizing your deadlift over your squat. So you can do that within your program by doing it more frequently, spending more sets there, doing it earlier in the workout. So you might dial your squats down to like 3 sets a week, and your deadlift, you might go up to like 5-6 sets a week, and maybe twice a week on that. So it's very informative when you're drawing up a training program where you're relatively strong, where you're relatively weak on that.
Yeah, and you sent it to me afterwards, and one of the things that I'll do is review it with the patient again, just to give them an overview from our side, from more the preventative med side. Again, why we do this. We're looking at like risk for mortality, but also just like where you can improve. And then from that strength assessment, you help people, if they want to reach their goals. So whether it is addressing those percentiles where, okay, your vertical press is in the 20th percentile, like that's a place that we want to focus on. And then also taking in their DEXA information, okay, it would be really beneficial for you to try to gain some lean muscle mass to reduce your risk for osteoporosis or diabetes or whatever it is. Somebody then decides, okay, I really want to work on strength and I want to put on some pounds of muscle. How do you help people? And I know we've kind of talked about it already during the podcast, but just like simple overview, how do you help people with limited time? So say they can only exercise, well, actually want you to answer that question. Okay. What is the minimum dose that you would say if their goal is to put on, let's just say female, again, 5 pounds of muscle and to get stronger?
Right. So it's a really good question that I wish I had like an objective answer for. Yeah. It's 47 minutes once a week. That's the perfect amount. But the truth of the matter is that it's going to be pretty relative based on what your age is, what your sex is. I know you mentioned female, what your training experience is. Mm-hmm. So right now, if I was to start training once a week for an hour, I would get weaker.
Being Frank, who is right here today.
Right here.
Yes.
Yeah. Me. Yeah. Let's talk about me. Comparatively, I train female clients who have never strength trained before. Right now, they just want to start doing 60 minutes one time a week of strength training. So based on that, I'm like, okay, that makes the program pretty simple because I'll just do we basically have time to do each of the 6 fundamental movement patterns for like 3 or 4 sets, maybe a little bit of accessory work at the end. And they're able to make progress, right? So they're able to, I'm calculating their estimated 1 rep max every time. So if you just know the weight that they lift, how many times they lifted it for, and a general gauge on what we would call RPE, or rating perceived exertion, like
how hard it is,
you can get a pretty reasonable estimation on what their 1 rep max is. And they're able to add a lot of strength pretty quickly.
That's going from somebody who hasn't weight trained before.
Correct.
Though. So they're increasing their load.
Right. But we're still taking those same principles of we need to progressively overload. We're going to do the same fundamental movements. And we're going to do that for a period of time and then eventually swap out variations for each other. So you can get stronger training once a week for 60 minutes. Mm-hmm. You can get stronger training, twice a week for 30 minutes. But eventually, as you get stronger, you're going to run into a plateau. Like you're not going to be able to go to the Olympics training one day a week. So then that's when you would have to introduce a second day as a dosing mechanism for more volume, which is going to be an important driver for driving the adaptations that you want. So for me as a trainer, the thing I care most about is that you're making progress. So if I have a client right now who's making progress on 1 time a week and they ask me, should I train twice a week? What I say to them is like, you'll probably get better, but right now you are making progress. We are heading in the right direction. So there's not this dire need to. You can absolutely do it. What I would recommend if you are training once a week is just getting the most out of that 1 session per week. So you're not going to get a lot of progress from doing bicep curls or doing some, bird dogs or the quality of training is very important. So training, not to failure, but like make the sets hard. Try to hit every muscle of the body, prioritizing the areas that you're relatively weak or that you care about more. So for dudes, they might bench press first and do more sets there. For women who care more about squats, we would do that more. So short answer, as little as you can while still being able to discern measurable progress.
Yeah. So it's going to be really dependent on where you're starting.
Right.
For sure. And then also what your goal is. Now, so that's like minimum effective dose. For most people, what do you think their minimum effective dose is? Or is it too hard to just guess? It's going to be so dependent on the person.
I would say because most people are not on a structured training program, one time a week for 60 minutes, if it's a quality program, will give you results.
Great.
And if you don't get results on it, guess what? You can do start training twice a week. And then, that should be enough to at least get you there. If you're a sicko like me, you can start training 6 times a week or whatever it is.
Okay, so that's the next question, though, is that if somebody has all the time in the world,
right?
I see these finance guys, they're like golfing half the time. They just have, what seems like they have a lot of time.
Right.
And they want to do the best thing they can from a health perspective. So not necessarily an aesthetic perspective, but from a health perspective. What do you think the dose would be for strength training in that regard? That's
an interesting question, because my first thought when you were saying that was the truth of the matter is that like performance and longevity are run parallel to each other for a long time, but eventually they'll diverge.
Right.
So if you care about maximizing performance, so if you're a competitive powerlifter and you just care about load on the bar, you might be willing to make some sacrifices in order to do that. From a health point of view, I would say so long as you're able to, what I tie it to is like when what I would call the SRA curve is maximized is going to be where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. What is an SRA curve? Great question. So
Frank is now interviewing himself for the record.
That's right. You weren't doing a good enough job, so I had to jump in. No, so SRA curve just means stimulus response adaptation. So if you picture an XY axis, when you train, when you train, I think this is a good way to do it. Okay, so when you train, your performance will dip, and you're generating this fatigue here. So if after you do 5 sets of squats, you're not able to squat as well as you did, but then you'll start recovering, and then eventually you'll super compensate above the level that you were at before, and that's your gains right there. So, and then you do it again, and so over time it kind of looks like this, and then it's up and to the right. So if you remember your high school algebra, y equals mx plus b, maximize the slope. So whenever the slope of that curve is at the highest is when you're in that sweet spot. So what you'd want there is what's called your maximum adaptive volume. So the amount of sets that you're spending and the thing that you're getting back is maximized. Anything above that would start to go into like overtraining volume. So where you're spending more but not getting anything in fatigue, as much in return, I should say. So you're generating more fatigue than you are creating new gains, putting yourself into a bigger and bigger hole. Instead, it might make more sense to train a little bit less, maximize recovery and whatnot. So I would say that if you love training in the gym, if you want to train in the gym, and you care about like a health and longevity point of view, you want to be training at such a level where you're making the most progress from microcycle to microcycle. Microcycle is just if you're on a 3-day split, 1, 2, 3. Next time you do a 1, 2, 3, that's 2 microcycles right there. Mesocycle would be with the length of the program. So one mesocycle would be like 6 microcycles. All right, now we're starting to get in the weeds.
Yeah, we're getting in there.
Yeah. But that's the thing you care about. So ideally, you're only training so that something else happens. Start measuring that something else and then have that lead you. So don't have some guy on a podcast tell you how often you should train. Listen to your body and say, okay, when I train 3 times a week, I'm able to make 15% gains. When I'm training 4 times a week, I'm able to make 20% gains. When I train 5 times a week, I'm only making 18% gains. Okay, something happens between 4 and 5 times a week where I'm not recovering as well. So that 3 is the sweet spot. And then the other thing that I'm not talking about, but I am talking about, is just the quality of training will be important too. So you can like exercise 7 days a week, but that might be a 20-minute walk. That's very different than doing a 5x5 on back squats at 90%. Like totally. Those are different things. So you might, if you do love training and you want to train 7 days a week, structuring your program such that you may maybe have more intense, more hard days, more easier days where you're able to take it off. Maybe that's the day you do like calves and biceps or something like that, forearms, some lighter ones so that the bigger systems of the body are able to recover by the time you hit it hard.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a bunch of variables. These are hard questions to answer because like a 30-minute session where you're doing just this accessory work is very different from a 60-minute session where you're doing some big lifts, right? So But I think what you're advocating for is to track yourself and see what gains you're actually getting and what's the sweet spot for you for an optimal duration and volume each week.
Right. Another thing I say to my clients sometimes is they're assuming that I'm in charge. The secret is I'm not actually in charge. Your bodies are in charge. Because if your body is telling us something that like it doesn't like this or it does like this thing, I'm going to lean into those things. Like if I know like, but when someone comes in and says like, how often should I be training? I'm like, I don't know, man. Like but we should try to find out. So let's throw some stuff at the wall, see what sticks. And like, if it's more successful, we're going to start doing more of that stuff. If it's less successful, we're going to toss it in the bin. So every new program, so let's just say that I have a client who's done 10, 12 programs with me or something like that, and I'm building out the 13th program. I want the bulk of that program to be just well-established things that we know work, that I am making the smartest bets such that in 6 weeks' time, we're going to get the best returns. So we'll call that like 75, 80% of the program is just stuff that I know is going to work. That is just our tried and true strategies. I might throw in like another 20% in experimentation such that we are looking for other even better new stuff. So it reminds me, I think it was Warren Buffett. He was talking about what his secret to success was. And his answer was very curt. It was just, I fire the bottom 10%. So I just, every year, who's ever at the bottom 10%, they're fired. And that sounds like very harsh, but what happens there is that someone who was in the 50th percent year one, by year 10 is now in the bottom percent. So he's always getting new talent in and just like keeping the core stuff. So I think it's something similar with strength training is that you want your tried and trues. You want the stuff that is working well, that you've built sufficient skill in, especially over the course of months, years, whatever it is. But you're also opening yourself up to experimentation and learning maybe a movement in a slightly different way, and you're still pulling from new information, which maybe will make its way as a regular part of your routine in the future.
Yeah. I love it. We've talked a lot about the actual training piece, and people will eventually hit plateaus, and then some people will just have a hard time making actual progress. A lot of the times you can see nutrition being a factor in that, of course. Hormones, which we talk about on our podcast, can definitely be a factor in terms of testosterone, even estrogen in women in the perimenopausal, postmenopausal years. From a nutrition standpoint, if somebody is not getting stronger, they're not putting on muscle, like what are the bare essentials there?
Right. I just want to qualify by saying, while I would argue I know more about especially sports nutrition than most trainers, I am not, by far and away, not an expert in this. I know some general heuristics. Like I had mentioned it earlier in the show, I worked in a food science lab. My mom's a food scientist. I tried my best to stay up to date with this stuff, but I'm just a dude who... Yeah.
And I more just want to touch on it because if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I'm doing all of that,
right, this
can be a big bucket where if you're eating no protein,
you're
not going to get... Yeah.
So with that
super high level.
With that said, 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight seems to be the sweet spot for protein. And I would always start there as far as like if you're figuring... Well, first I would start with how many calories are you eating per day? That is like your budget. And then figuring out what you're consuming per day. If you want to lose weight, a little bit less than that. If you want to gain weight, a little bit more than that.
Yep.
Based on, once you have that number, 1.2 or 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, that's about, on the high end, 1 gram per pound for our American listeners.
Yeah, and I usually will set people at that, depending on the person, just because most people won't hit it, and they'll end up somewhere below it that's still acceptable.
Right. So what I would say is that, like, if you are falling short, you're still getting most of the gain. Like, it's marginal returns, but you're going to be getting most of the gains if you're getting some. And, like, the difference is going to start tapering off. So if you're at, like, 80 grams and you go up to 120 grams, that will be a bigger jump than 120 to 160 will be more than like 160 to 200. And then eventually at about that 2.2 number is when you can eat more protein, but like, your body can really only synthesize so much new muscle tissue at a time. And it seems to be about that 2.2 limit.
Yeah.
But feel free to go above that, although you might start noticing some GI distress.
Totally. Okay, what about differences between men and women when they're weight training? Anything to think about?
Yeah, this is. I'm actually writing another. Everybody read my blog. Um, I'm writing a blog post right now talking about it. So, men and women are definitely different. They are different. They're not different species. They are. There is more there's more in common there than there is different. So, like the general same principles apply. So, specificity, train for the goal that you want, progressively overload it, manage your fatigue. All of that stuff is the same. There are some things around the edges that I have noticed, or that the science supports. One is that women typically seem to be able to train for more reps at a higher percentage of 1RM. What does that mean? So if I have a dude at 90% of 1RM and they might be able to do, 3-4 reps at that, a woman might be able to do 4, 5, 6 would be a lot, but like it's feasible.
And to pause you just for those who aren't familiar with the terms, you're just saying 90% of 1RM, really heavy weight.
Yeah.
So you're getting to a maximal movement, right?
Right.
And so how many reps can you do at that really tough weight?
Right. Yeah. So if your max bench is 200 pounds and then you go to 90%, that's 180, right? So you can kind of calculate that. There's some percentage-based programs out there where you just calculate your estimated 1 rep max and then work off that. Yeah, so there's little things like that. I know certain women, their cycles can affect training. Not something I know a whole lot about.
It's not, especially on social media, it's not as pronounced as what the influencers actually make it to be. And I don't recommend women train by their cycle. I don't see any need for that for the most part, other than if you're exhausted, of course, take care of yourself. But if you're not exhausted, to train by your cycle and tell yourself that you should, I think you're going to waste a lot of potential gains by doing that. That's not actually evidence-based or worth making changes.
I'm so glad you said that, because you saying that I think carries more weight than if, some dude is just like, get over it.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a great myth to bust, where it's like we should be training based on our cycles, or we should be eating based on our menstrual cycles. And I would say there's very little to, if any, research to really support that, other than, of course, don't crush yourself. If you're exhausted that day, then take it easy.
Yeah.
But from a hormonal standpoint, I think you're probably going to lose more gains than gain gains doing something like that, because you may be way too reserved where you could have gone and done a hard workout that day if you felt good.
Yeah. Yeah. We're working on a blog. Minreet, my partner, and I are working on a blog post right now, kind of pretty much just talking about exactly what you just talked about. And it's nice coming from a woman, again, because if a dude is like a woman's on her cycle and you just tell her, just suck it up, not very
tough.
Yeah, it's tough.
Tough crowd.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's go into more of the myths
Sure.
as we're wrapping it up. What are some of the popular kind of fads, trends that you feel like are potentially detrimental, not worth pursuing out there?
One of them I see all the time on social media is just like, I describe as head on a hat training. So you're doing a goblet squat with chains on a Bosu ball, single leg, jumping.
Yeah.
With resistance bands somewhere in there. And I'm like, what are you trying to communicate with your body here? Like, what is the message? What are we doing? You're like doing 7 different things.
Yeah.
Versus just like, if you're doing a lat pull down, what you're saying is like, oh, I want to get my lats to get stronger. Like, that's a very easy message to be getting. So the mistake of more complicated means more better is one that I see on socials all the time.
Yes.
The other one I am writing another post on is like the orange zone training. So just that, for those that don't know, there are these different heart rate zones. And there is a theory, and I've seen posts about it, that if you're training in like the orange zone,
which, if you guys are going by a 5-zone training model, that's typically zone 4, they'll call it.
Yeah.
But depending on
whatever. Yeah. That like, if you just train in this zone, you're going to build more muscle. You're going to it's just like the magic pill. Like we're gonna burn more fat, and I think that just really does a poor job misappropriating the science, right? So they'll claim that like, oh, you're burning more. The calories that you're burning here are coming from fat versus like carbohydrates or whatever. But it really, like, your body doesn't, it doesn't matter like how many calories you're pulling from fat versus carbohydrates within the hour, because like you exist in 24 hours. So it's like a whole day thing, not just like what you're doing in that workout. Beyond that, if you're like training in that zone and never like recovering, like you're also not doing a great job of progressively overload, like putting in increased tension on the muscles to grow muscle. There's a lot been said about EPOC, or the exercise post-oxygen consumption. I remember, I'll still see posts about it, about how, oh, this workout is the best because after you work out, you continue to burn calories, but it's like this much and it doesn't make a difference. Yeah.
Totally. Especially if you're looking at, okay, maybe you're somebody who consumes, or burns like 2,000 calories a day as your basal metabolic rate.
Yeah.
Like how much are we talking about extra calories burned with
I mean,
EPOC?
yeah, it's a drop in the bucket. The other one I see is just like mindless, endless amounts of cardio. So I need to get 20, 30, 50,000 steps in a day, or I got to go on a treadmill for this long. And if you look at, if you are burning 2,000 calories a day, where most of those calories are being burned from, like exercise is like a tiny, it's significant. It's important. Like, I'm not going to say, I wouldn't diminish it, but like the amount of calories that you burn like consuming food, like the thermogenic effect of food, is like higher than the amount I do squatting 400 pounds. So overemphasizing cardio. I think Herman Ponzer has also published some really interesting research on like metabolic adaptation. So like he looked at some more rural civilizations of humans who take like 50, 100,000 steps a day, and found that they weren't necessarily burning more calories per day than us who live in our modern society. Because if it was the case that humans like could just do exercise, more and more exercise, and burn more and more calories, we would all just die. Like, because like we would need so much food to like sustain that habit. So your body has this like central governor. Like if you start taking 30,000 steps a day, your body's like, oh, our energy expenditure is really high. We need to pull energy reserves from other places. And so, the first 10,000 steps that you make throughout the day are going to be very effective for like fat loss. The next 10,000, slightly, less, but still important for, the next 10,000 after that. Like, I don't know how much of a difference it makes, especially if you're generating all this fatigue from it. Now you can't progressively overload your strength training work.
Right. So you're talking about like the adaptation that occurs where your body is actually able to thermoregulate, right? And turn down the metabolic clock, or it's more like a thermostat, to say, hey, we're outputting a ton of calories with movement and we're not getting all of that back. So we need to turn other systems down.
Right.
Which is a well-known effect, and you see it in people with eating disorders as well. If there's not enough calories coming in, then your body will also turn that dial down, and that's where you'll see fatigue onset, as well as even like body systems start to shut down, like the digestive system will start to fail and things like that. And that all to be said, where most Americans are not worried about exercising too much. So what I would also say is that majority of people need to exercise more, and it's going to benefit them not just from a fat loss standpoint, but just from a cardiovascular, respiratory standpoint as well, right? And the point that you're making is that if fat loss is the goal, being on the treadmill for 7 hours a day, probably not helpful. You're going to have diminishing returns after a certain point.
Yeah, I also think you're cultivating a negative association with exercise. Exercise is like this form of punishment. Yeah. And I guess if we're talking about like myths, like I like working out. I love working out. There's a lot of reasons to work out. I think anybody who's looked at the science will, may be afraid to say that like working out actually is not the best thing to do for fat loss. Like if you are working out 6-7 days a week, but like you have a poor diet, like you're not going to lose a lot of fat.
Totally.
Yeah.
And my inside is like, oh, save some McDonald's. But I agree where if you're trying to lose weight, you have to talk about calories and nutrition.
Right.
So that's where you're going to get most of your bang for your buck when it comes to actual body composition optimization from a fat loss standpoint. And I have patients that are listening to this, I know. So it's like most of the time, the goal for body composition optimization is not just fat loss, it's also muscle growth.
Right.
And so making sure that we're thinking about both of those things. And sometimes we're actually thinking more about muscle growth than fat loss, especially when you're looking at a DEXA. And yeah, maybe your percentage of fat is on the higher side, but it's due to the fact that you just don't have a ton of lean mass.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Oh man, I was learning recently about basal metabolic rate and why is it that people who lift have higher BMRs, and like a crazy stat that I heard about recently. So like, yeah, like if you lift more, you're going to have more muscle mass, but that doesn't really seem to answer the question of like, why do people who work out seem to burn more calories? And it turns out it has to like a lot to do with your organs. So people who like train more, like from a like weight point of view, your kidneys, liver, heart, like don't weigh that much, but they consume like a disproportionately high amount of your calories.
Especially the liver.
Yeah. And when you start training, the energy demands of those three especially, also your brain, but your brain doesn't really seem to be as affected by strength training, like goes up a lot. Mm-hmm. So your BMR will go up to compensate that. And then, so like I could see if you are going from untrained to trained, having a more sizable effect in terms of weight loss, because you're like, you just like doubled your budget for like, amount of calories that you could spend or whatever it is. But if you're already a trained individual and you're relying on exercise for especially fat loss, that's going to be a tough game to play.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, the last few. These are directly from social media.
Oh,
okay, so some well-known influencer said, quote, "Ditch hours of exercise. Do this 15-minute biohack and see 6x your results. Oh. This person advocates for 20 minutes of resistance training weekly, and that's all you need to be healthy." What are your candid thoughts, Frank Hawley?
I think sensational claims require sensational evidence. It seems very like sales pitchy that they are just trying to sell, I don't know, their resistance bands or their exercise program or whatever. Listen, nobody loves resistance training more than me. I love training. You assuming that you're going to train 20 minutes like 3 times a week or whatever it is, and that
once a week.
Once a week? That's even
20
worse.
minutes of resistance training weekly is all you need to be healthy.
I mean, that's pretty crazy. So like, I love resistance training. It does a lot of good stuff, a lot of stuff that we covered today. But to say that it's a whole encompassing catch-all is nuts. Like me getting my bench press better, like how is that going to affect my cardiorespiratory health? Like not a lot.
Yeah.
How is that going to, it's, yeah.
This one makes me angry. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
And 20 minutes of exercise is great if you're not doing anything. Of course, yes. But to say that that's where we should stop, I think, is missing a lot of the picture.
I mean, yeah, it's certainly not all I need. If I did that, I would shrivel like a raisin.
Yeah. We don't want to see raisin Frank.
No, I feel like that'd be bad for my business too.
Okay, the other one that we'll see a lot, this has been forever, is that weight training makes you bulky, and that's why, females should more stick to Pilates.
Yeah. Disagree with that. I am empathetic to the female position. So I definitely understand that there is a lot of societal pressure to look a certain way. But I also recognize that strength training is, like, especially for women who have less muscle mass naturally and have a harder time maybe putting it on, that they don't want to look a certain way. Genetics are going to play a big role in that. And I would say that I see a lot of fitness trainers bash on this idea of like, oh, I just want to get toned. And they'll like kind of make fun of their clients that they want to get toned. But like what your client is telling you there is that like, I don't want to like maximize hypertrophy and maybe be a bit more empathetic towards that. So there's certain things that you can do as I can do as a trainer. So maybe you don't train as close to, volitional failure. So you leave more reps in reserve. You don't maximize isolation movements like bicep curls, lateral raises, which might give more of an appearance here. You maybe focus more on the fundamental movement patterns, like, just functional movements of being able to pick something up or focusing on stability, still progressively overloading that. But also, like, I've been trying to get like too big for too long, and it's like hard. It's like really hard to get like big. And so also, I just like training is not this static thing where who you are right now is like a sculpture. The way I view it, it's like very fluid, where if you are a woman and you're concerned about getting too bulky, what I would say is you can train and see if you make progress. If at any stage you feel like you are getting too bulky, you can do things to ramp down, right? So you might move away from...
This is a very novel idea.
Yeah, like it's not like this binary thing. So like, let's just say that hypertrophy is maximized at like 20 sets per week for, I don't know, your legs, and you don't want your legs to get too bulky. And you are at 12 sets and they started getting too bulky. Maybe you just do like 5 sets a week. Maybe instead of doing something that's more in the hypertrophy range, so doing sets of 10, maybe you focus on sets of 5 instead, and maybe increase the weight a little bit, focusing more on that strength component. So when you're training at lower weights, higher intensities, that won't put on as much muscle as lighter weights at more reps, which is also something that I feel like, if we're talking myths, there's this idea with women that like, oh, I just need to use light weights and then that'll keep me, like small weights equals small muscles, when the opposite, it seems to be true.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, where can people find you? How do you work with people?
You can find me, my personal Instagram is just my name, at Frank Hawley. I also am trying to get the Vero Training, that Instagram, get a bit more traction at Vero Training, both of those on Instagram. We also have a website, verotraining.com, where you can find out more about me, my partner, Manpreet Sangha, who is the physical therapist on staff at Vero. She knows a lot of stuff that I don't know, so I just get big muscle, get people big muscles, get them strong, but when they beat them up, she fixes them so I can do the same thing over again.
And she does a lot of pelvic floor PT too.
That is like her area of expertise. So anything ortho or pelvic floor is her. So women's health, either postpartum, or is her area of specialties, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
This was fun.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.